Welcome back to the Sleep Library, where history unfolds at the gentle pace of a turning page. Tonight, we venture into one of medieval society's most paradoxical professions, the executioner's trade. Far from the dramatic portrayals of popular culture, the reality of medieval executioners was one of quiet professionalism, inherited responsibility, and surprising social complexity. Close your eyes and let your mind drift back through the centuries, to a time when justice moved at the measured pace of tradition, and certain families bore the weight of society's final judgments. These were not the hooded, mysterious figures of legend, but skilled craftsmen who inherited their trade like any other from father to son, generation after generation. The story we'll explore tonight is one of human complexity, of families who lived in the shadows of society, yet were indispensable to it. It's a tale told in hushed voices across medieval Europe, where the executioner's block stood a silent testimony to the delicate balance between civilization and its necessary darkness. In the quiet hours before dawn in medieval Europe, when the morning mist still clung to cobblestone streets, the executioner's house stood like any other, perhaps a bit larger than most, built of sturdy stone rather than timber, with a workshop attached where the tools of the trade were kept in meticulous order. To the casual observer, it might have housed a blacksmith or carpenter, any craftsman whose work required precision and care. The medieval executioner occupied a position in society that defies our modern understanding. Neither outcast nor honored citizen, they existed in a carefully maintained space between acceptance and isolation. Their work was essential, sanctioned by law, blessed by church doctrine, and demanded by the social order. Yet their very necessity created a profound ambivalence in the communities they served. Consider Hans Schmidt, executioner of Nuremberg from 1573 to 1617, whose detailed diary survives to this day. In its pages, written in careful Gothic script, we find not the ravings of a bloodthirsty madman, but the measured records of a conscientious professional. "Today I executed an opponent with the sword," he might write, followed immediately by notes about his herb garden or the repair of his house's roof. The juxtaposition reveals the strange normalcy that surrounded this most extraordinary of professions. The executioner's children grew up knowing that their father's work set them apart. They learned early to recognize the subtle shift in conversation when their family name was mentioned, the way neighbors might not politely but rarely linger for lengthy discussions. Yet they also learned that their father was not a monster, but a man who rose each morning, said his prayers, and went about his duties with the same dedication as any other craftsman. The social isolation was real but incomplete. Executioners couldn't serve on juries, hold civic office, or join guilds, yet they often owned substantial property, lived comfortably, and were sought after for their medical knowledge. Many supplemented their income as healers, their intimate knowledge of human anatomy, making them surprisingly effective physicians. The same hands that wielded the sword might later set a broken bone or brew medicinal herbs. Marriage presented particular challenges for executioner families. Daughters often struggled to find husbands outside the profession, leading to a complex web of intermarriage between executioner families across different cities and regions. Sons might rebel against their inheritance, seeking to break free from the family calling, only to find that legitimate trades remained largely close to them. The physical tools of the trade were passed down like family heirlooms, each sword or axe bearing the weight of generations. A well-crafted executioner's sword might serve a family for decades, its balance perfected through years of use, its edge maintained with the same care a violinist gives to their bow. These were not crude instruments of butchery, but precision tools crafted by master smiths specifically for the executioner's art. Training began early and proceeded slowly. A boy destined for the family trade would first learn the peripheral skills, how to maintain equipment, how to prepare the scaffold, how to manage crowds. Only gradually would he be introduced to the actual methods of execution, learning first on condemned criminals already dead, practicing the precise angles and motions that would ensure swift, merciful death. The psychological burden was real and acknowledged within these families. Fathers spoke to sons about the weight of taking life, even in service to justice. They developed rituals and practices to maintain their humanity, prayers before each execution, careful attention to the dignity of the condemned, and an almost obsessive focus on technical perfection to minimize suffering. Records from the Schmidt family of Nuremberg reveal a fascinating detail. They kept careful statistics not just of executions performed, but of merciful deaths cases where their skill had allowed the condemned to die quickly and without apparent pain. This wasn't mere professional pride, but a genuine attempt to find meaning and honor in work that society demanded yet couldn't fully embrace. The executioner's workshop was a place of quiet industry. Here, swords were sharpened to razor keenness, ropes were tested for strength and proper weave, and scaffolds were assembled with the precision of fine furniture. Everything was checked and double-checked, for the executioner's reputation depended not on the number of lives taken, but on the competence and mercy with which the task was performed. Evening meals in executioner households carried their own peculiar character. Conversation might drift from the day's ordinary concerns, the price of grain, news from neighboring towns, a daughter's impending marriage, to technical discussions that would chill an outsider's blood. "Father, what if the condemned is particularly tall?" a son might ask, and the discussion that followed would be conducted with the same matter-of-fact tone as any craftsman explaining the subtleties of his trade. The community's relationship with these families was complex and ever-evolving. In times of crisis, plague, war, or social upheaval, the executioner's services might be in particularly high demand, and with that demand came a grudging increase in respect and social standing. During peaceful periods, when executions were rare, the family might fade somewhat into the background of community life, their children playing with other children, their wives shopping in the same markets. This delicate social balance required constant negotiation. Executioner families learned to read the community's mood, to know when their presence was tolerated and when it might be better to keep to themselves. They developed a kind of social camouflage, becoming expertly ordinary in all aspects of life save one. The morning sun filtered through the narrow windows of Master Wilhelm's house in Frankfurt, circa 1387. As his young son Johann carefully arranged the tools in their father's workshop, neither could have imagined they were establishing what would become a dynasty spanning 3 centuries. The Volstriger family name would eventually become synonymous with swift, merciful justice across the German states. Their reputation built one careful execution at a time. The origins of executioner dynasties lie not in ancient tradition, but in the practical necessities of medieval justice. As European towns grew larger and more complex during the High Middle Ages, the informal systems of community punishment that had served smaller settlements became inadequate. The need for skilled, reliable executioners coincided with the medieval guild system's emphasis on hereditary crafts, creating the perfect conditions for professional dynasties to emerge. Master Wilhelm had not been born to the trade. Originally a soldier in the service of the Holy Roman Emperor, he had shown particular skill with a sword during military campaigns. When a town executioner position became vacant in Frankfurt, the previous holder having died of plague, Wilhelm's military experience and proven competence with weapons made him an attractive candidate. The town council, desperate to fill the position, overlooked the usual preference for hereditary succession. The transition from soldier to executioner required more than martial skill. Wilhelm spent months studying under an aging executioner from a neighboring town, learning not just the technical aspects of execution, but the complex web of protocols, traditions, and social expectations that surrounded the profession. He learned to read the subtle signs that distinguished different types of condemned criminals, to adjust his methods accordingly, and to maintain the dignity that medieval society demanded even in its harshest moments. Johann's childhood unfolded in this atmosphere of careful learning. His earliest memories included the methodical sound of his father sharpening blades, the measured tones in which Wilhelm discussed the day's work with visiting officials, and the quiet pride his father took in performing his duties with competence and mercy. The boy learned that their family served society in a way that was both essential and eternally complicated. The establishment of the Volstricker reputation required years of careful work. Each execution Wilhelm performed was conducted with meticulous attention to detail, from the preparation of equipment to the final handling of the body. Word of his competence spread slowly through the network of courts and administrative centers that governed medieval justice. Other towns began requesting his services for particularly difficult cases, and gradually, the Volstricker name became associated with professional excellence. Marriage presented the first major test of the developing dynasty. Wilhelm's choice of bride would determine whether his children could successfully integrate into the broader executioner community, or would remain isolated. He chose carefully Margit, daughter of the executioner of Mainz, herself born into the profession and understanding its unique demands. Their union represented not just a personal bond, but a political alliance between two professional families. Margaret brought to the marriage not only her understanding of the executioner's life, but also valuable connections to other professional families across the region. Her letters to relatives in distant towns carried information about available positions, suitable marriage prospects for their growing children, and technical innovations in the craft. Through such correspondence, a loose network of executioner families maintained contact across the fragmented political landscape of medieval Europe. The birth of additional children expanded the dynasty's possibilities and challenges. Johann, as the eldest son, would naturally inherit his father's position and responsibilities. But Wilhelm and Margaret also had daughters whose futures needed careful consideration, and a second son whose path required alternative planning. The family's resources had to be allocated not just for immediate needs, but for the long-term security of all their children. Training Johann in the family profession began with the most mundane tasks. He learned to maintain leather straps, to oil metal fittings, and to arrange the various tools in their proper order. His education included reading and writing unusual for many medieval craftsmen, but essential for an executioner who would need to understand legal documents and maintain detailed records. He studied basic medicine and anatomy, knowledge that would serve him both in his primary profession and in the healing work that supplemented many executioners' incomes. The psychological preparation proved more challenging than the technical training. Wilhelm understood that his son would need not just skill, but emotional resilience to perform their family's work. He arranged for Johann to observe executions from a distance before gradually bringing him closer to the actual process. Each step was carefully measured, allowing the boy to develop the emotional calluses necessary for the work while maintaining his essential humanity. Other executioner families watched the Volstricker development with interest. The profession's small size meant that every family's success or failure affected the broader community's reputation. Wilhelm's growing competence reflected well on all executioners, while any failure would have damaged the profession's standing. This created a complex dynamic of cooperation and competition within the executioner community. The family's growing prosperity became visible in their expanding household. Wilhelm's success allowed them to purchase additional property, to employ servants for domestic work, and to maintain their equipment at the highest standards. Johann's education included not just professional training, but the broader learning appropriate to a family of increasing social standing within their specialized community. Records from the Frankfurt Town Council reveal the gradual integration of the Volstricker family into the town's administrative structure. Wilhelm began serving not just as executioner, but as consultant on matters of criminal justice, security, and even public health during plague outbreaks. His medical knowledge, derived from his intimate understanding of human anatomy, made him valuable during times of crisis. The development of family traditions accompanied their professional growth. The Volstruckers established annual visits to the graves of those they had executed, a private ceremony of remembrance and prayer that became a defining characteristic of their approach to the profession. They maintained detailed records not just of executions performed, but of the personal details of the condemned, their last words, their family circumstances, their expressions of remorse or defiance. By the time Johann reached adulthood, the Volstrucker name had become established throughout the region. Their professional reputation opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed, and their growing wealth provided security that many medieval families could never achieve. Yet success brought its own burdens: increased scrutiny, high expectations, and the constant pressure to maintain standards that had taken a generation to establish. The emergence of the Volstrucker dynasty represented more than just one family's success. It exemplified the transformation of execution from an occasional, amateur undertaking into a professional service provided by skilled specialists. Their story illustrates how medieval society's need for competent administration of justice created opportunities for certain families to establish themselves in this most unusual of professions. In the Pioidon quiet of Master Johann Volstrucker's workshop, shadows danced across walls lined with implements that would have seemed mundane in any other craftsman's domain. Here hung the tools that had served 3 generations of his family, each blade, rope, and wooden component maintained with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. The morning ritual of inspection and preparation had become as natural as breathing, passed down from father to son like a sacred liturgy. The executioner's sword occupied the place of honor, mounted on wooden brackets that Johann's grandfather Wilhelm had carved with his own hands. This was not the crude, heavy blade that popular imagination might conjure, but a masterwork of the swordsmith's art, forged in Toledo by Master Rodriguez in 1389. It measured precisely 38 inches from pommel to point, with a blade carefully balanced to ensure clean, swift cuts. The steel had been folded dozens of times during forging, creating the characteristic pattern that marked truly exceptional weapons. Johann's fingers traced the blade's edge with the careful attention of a musician tuning his instrument. The sword's balance point fell exactly 4 inches forward of the crossguard, perfect for the controlled, powerful strokes required for clean decapitation. Too heavy, and the blade would be unwieldy in the precise moments when control mattered most. Too light, and it might fail to complete its work with the merciful swiftness that both law and conscience demanded. The blade bore the subtle marks of its long service, tiny nicks carefully polished away, a slight wear pattern near the fuller where generations of hands had gripped it during maintenance. Most significantly, along the flat of the blade, Master Wilhelm had commissioned an engraver to inscribe a prayer in Latin, Justitia et Misericordia, Justice and Mercy. These words served as a daily reminder of the dual nature of the executioner's calling. Beside the sword hung its companion pieces, the execution block, carved from a single piece of seasoned oak that had been treated with oil and wax until it gleamed like dark amber. The block's upper surface showed the subtle depression worn by decades of use, its edges rounded smooth by the patient work of 3 generations. Johann's great-uncle Heinrich, himself an executioner in distant Cologne, had carved the block as a wedding gift for Wilhelm and Margit, and the family had treasured it ever since. The ropes deserved equal attention, for they served in executions where hanging was prescribed by law or custom. Johann maintained 3 sets, rotating their use to prevent any single rope from weakening through repeated stress. Each rope measured exactly 13 feet in length, long enough to provide the necessary drop for a swift death, yet short enough for proper control during the process. The hemp had been specially treated with oils to prevent rot and maintain flexibility, and each rope was tested monthly with weights to ensure its continued reliability. Master Johann had inherited not only the tools themselves, but the accumulated wisdom of their proper use and maintenance. His father Klaus had spent countless hours teaching him the subtle differences between various types of executions, how different tools served different purposes, and how the executioner's skill could minimize suffering even in the harshest of sentences. This knowledge formed an oral tradition as carefully preserved as any monastery's collection of manuscripts. The axes represented another branch of the family's expertise. While beheading with a sword was considered the most merciful method, certain executions required the use of an axe, particularly when dealing with prisoners whose crimes had been deemed especially heinous. The family maintained two axes, one for standard executions, another kept in reserve. Both had been crafted by the same Toledo workshop that had produced their sword, ensuring consistency in balance and sharpness. Each tool had its own maintenance schedule, as rigorous as any religious observance. Blades were sharpened on specific days of the week using whetstones that had been carefully selected for their particular grit and hardness. The process could take hours, but Johann had learned to find meditation in the rhythmic scraping of steel against stone, the gradual emergence of the perfect edge that would serve both justice and mercy. The workshop also contained the apparatus for torture, though this aspect of the executioner's duties was gradually declining by the time Johann inherited the family profession. The rack, the strappado, and various other implements of interrogation were maintained more from tradition than regular use, as legal procedures were slowly evolving toward less physically coercive methods of obtaining confessions. Johann's son Wilhelm, named for his great-grandfather, began learning the tool's secrets from the age of 12. His education started with the most basic tasks: cleaning and oiling metal surfaces, checking rope fibers for signs of wear, and arranging the workshop's contents in their proper order. Only gradually was he introduced to the more complex aspects of maintenance and use, each lesson building upon the previous one, like the construction of a cathedral. The passing of tools from father to son involved ceremonies as formal as any guild's traditions. When Klaus had deemed Johann ready to inherit the family's primary sword, the transfer took place in the presence of Margit, then the family matriarch, and Johann's younger brother, Henrik, who had chosen to pursue the healing arts rather than follow the family's primary profession. Klaus placed the weapon in Johann's hands while reciting the names of all family members who had previously wielded it, creating a direct connection across generations. Each tool carried stories embedded in its physical form: the slight discoloration on the sword's crossguard where Wilhelm's nervous grip had worn away the original finish during his first execution, the smooth patch on the oak log where countless condemned prisoners had rested their necks, the careful repairs to rope that marked particularly challenging cases. These implements were not merely instruments of death, but repositories of family memory and professional experience. The workshop's organization reflected generations of accumulated wisdom about efficiency and safety. Every tool had its designated place, arranged not just for convenience, but to ensure that nothing could be forgotten or misplaced during the crucial preparations before an execution. Johann could locate any implement in complete darkness, a skill that proved valuable during night executions or in emergency situations. Seasonal maintenance followed patterns established by Wilhelm and refined by each successive generation. Spring brought complete disassembly and inspection of all mechanical components. Summer required special attention to preventing rust in the humid conditions. Autumn demanded preparation for winter storage, and winter provided time for major repairs and improvements. This cyclical approach ensured that equipment remained in perfect condition despite the demands placed upon it. The financial investment represented by these tools was substantial. A single executioner's sword might cost as much as a skilled craftsman earned in an entire year, while the various supporting implements required their own significant expenditures. Executioner families often went into debt to equip themselves properly, viewing the expense as an investment in their professional reputation and effectiveness. Innovation occurred slowly and carefully within the conservative traditions of the profession. When new designs or techniques emerged, they were tested exhaustively before adoption. Johann maintained correspondence with other executioner families across Europe, sharing information about improvements in tool design, new maintenance techniques, and innovations that might increase the efficiency or mercy of their work. The tools also served symbolic functions beyond their practical applications. Their presence in the workshop reminded each generation of their responsibilities and inheritance, while their careful maintenance demonstrated the family's commitment to their professional standards. Visitors to the workshop, whether official inspectors, fellow professionals, or family members, could immediately assess the family's dedication through the condition of their implements. The first snowfall of winter had blanketed Frankfurt streets when young Wilhelm Vollstrecker first accompanied his father Johann to witness an execution. At 14 years old, he had spent 2 years learning the peripheral aspects of the family trade, maintaining equipment, preparing scaffolds, and studying the theoretical aspects of their profession. Now, standing in the shadow of the cathedral while morning light filtered through bare tree branches, he would take the next step in his inheritance of centuries-old family responsibilities. Johann had chosen this particular execution with care. The condemned man, a horse thief named Friedrich, had shown genuine remorse for his crimes and had spent his final weeks in prayer and preparation for death. The crime itself, while serious enough to warrant execution under imperial law, lacked the brutal characteristics that might traumatize a young apprentice. More importantly, Friedrich was of average build and height, presenting none of the technical challenges that occasionally complicated the executioner's work. The weeks leading to this moment had been filled with careful preparation, not just of equipment, but of Wilhelm's understanding of what he would witness. Johann had explained the legal precedents that made execution necessary, the spiritual framework within which medieval society understood capital punishment, and the executioner's role as an instrument of divine justice administered through human law. These conversations took place in the quiet hours after the family's evening meal, when the workshop was still and shadows gathered in the corners. Wilhelm's education had begun years earlier with lessons that seemed unrelated to his eventual profession. He learned to read and write with facility unusual for his social class, skills essential for understanding legal documents and maintaining the detailed records that authorities required. His mathematical education focused particularly on geometry and measurement knowledge necessary for constructing scaffolds and calculating the precise drop distances required for merciful hangings. The study of human anatomy formed another crucial component of his training. Johann possessed medical texts acquired from various sources over the years, and he used these to teach Wilhelm the locations of major blood vessels, the structure of the neck and spine, and the precise angles required for clean decapitation. This knowledge served not only the family's primary profession, but also their secondary occupation as healers, since many executioner families supplemented their income through medical practice. Physical training complemented intellectual education. Wilhelm spent hours each day developing the strength and coordination required for their work. He practiced sword work against wooden posts, learning the precise motions that would become second nature when human lives depended on his skill. The training emphasized control and precision rather than brute force. A clean execution required technical mastery, not mere physical power. Johann insisted that Wilhelm understand the human dimension of their work. He shared stories of prisoners he had executed over the years, their backgrounds, their crimes, their final words, and their family circumstances. These accounts served to humanize the condemned while reinforcing the gravity of the executioner's responsibility. Wilhelm learned that their profession required not callousness, but rather the ability to maintain compassion while performing society's harshest duties. The psychological preparation proved as demanding as the technical training. Johann arranged for Wilhelm to spend time with Father Benedict, the prison chaplain who ministered to condemned prisoners. Through these visits, Wilhelm learned to recognize the various ways people face death, some with courage, others with terror, many with a complex mixture of emotions that defied simple categorization. He began to understand how the executioner's manner and competence could either add to or alleviate the condemned person's final suffering. On the morning of Wilhelm's first observation, father and son rose before dawn to complete their preparations. Johann inspected every piece of equipment twice, explained each step of the process, and reminded Wilhelm of the serious responsibility they bore. Their work served justice, but it also required them to end a human life, a gravity that no amount of legal authorization could diminish. The scaffold had been erected in the town square, according to specifications that had remained unchanged for generations. Johann explained how the platform's height allowed the crowd to witness justice being served while providing the executioner with proper leverage for his work. The block's placement, the angle of the morning sun, even the direction the condemned would face, every detail had been calculated to serve both practical necessity and ceremonial dignity. Wilhelm's first glimpse of the condemned man challenged his expectations. Friedrich appeared neither monster nor hero, but simply a frightened human being facing the consequences of his choices. The prisoner's obvious terror evoked Wilhelm's sympathy, while his genuine expressions of remorse demonstrated the possibility of redemption, even in the face of ultimate punishment. The young apprentice began to understand the complex moral landscape his family navigated. The execution itself proceeded with the measured dignity that characterized Johann's professional approach. He spoke briefly with Friedrich, offering what comfort he could while ensuring the prisoner understood the process. The actual beheading required only moments, but those moments demonstrated the culmination of years of training and preparation. Wilhelm watched his father's precise movements, noting how technical mastery served the cause of mercy. In the hours following the execution, Johann and Wilhelm walked slowly through Frankfurt streets, processing what they had witnessed. Johann encouraged his son to speak about his reactions to fear, revulsion, and sadness that naturally accompanied such experiences. These conversations formed an essential part of the apprenticeship, helping Wilhelm understand how to maintain his humanity while performing work that society demanded but found difficult to acknowledge. The evening brought the family together for their traditional post-execution meal, a simple affair that nonetheless carried deep significance. Johann's wife Maria had prepared foods associated with remembrance and blessing, while the family took time to pray for Friedrich's soul and for their own continued ability to serve justice with mercy. Wilhelm's participation in this ritual marked his formal entry into the family's professional traditions. Subsequent training built upon this foundation, gradually exposing Wilhelm to more complex and challenging situations. He learned to manage different types of crowds, to handle prisoners who resisted or panicked, and to maintain his composure when executions didn't proceed exactly as planned. Each experience added to his understanding of the profession's demands and complexities. Johann also arranged for Wilhelm to spend time with other executioner families, exposing him to different techniques and approaches. A summer visit to his great-uncle Heinrich in Cologne provided opportunities to observe alternative methods and to understand how local customs and legal traditions influenced the profession's practice. These exchanges strengthened the bonds between executioner families while expanding Wilhelm's professional knowledge. The apprenticeship included training in the business aspects of the profession. Wilhelm learned to negotiate fees with various authorities, to maintain relationships with court officials and clergy, and to manage the family's financial affairs. Executioners often traveled considerable distances to perform their services, requiring skills in logistics and planning beyond the technical aspects of their work. By his 16th birthday, Wilhelm had developed sufficient competence to assist his father during executions, though he would not perform them independently for several more years. His role as assistant required its own specialized skills managing equipment, controlling crowds, and providing backup support when circumstances demanded flexibility. These responsibilities prepared him for eventual full inheritance of the family profession. The relationship between Johann and Wilhelm evolved throughout the apprenticeship from simple teacher-student to professional colleagues. Johann recognized that his son brought fresh perspectives and innovations that could improve their work, while Wilhelm developed deep respect for the wisdom his father had accumulated through decades of experience. Their collaboration represented the successful transmission of professional knowledge across generations. The morning bells of St. Bartholomew's Cathedral had barely finished their call to prime when an upholsterer began her daily rounds through Frankfurt's marketplace. To the casual observer, she appeared no different from any other prosperous merchant's wife, her basket woven from fine willow. Her woolen cloak dyed a practical brown, her manner confident yet respectful as she selected vegetables and inquired about prices. Only the most observant might notice how conversation subtly shifted when she approached, or how vendors' eyes flickered with a mixture of respect and unease. Anna's husband Johann had not performed an execution in nearly 3 months, yet the family's reputation preceded her through every interaction. The baker's wife nodded politely, but didn't linger for the extended conversations that marked genuine friendship. The fishmonger provided excellent service, but avoided the casual banter he shared with other long-time customers. This delicate social dance had become as natural as breathing, a constant reminder that the Vollstrecker family occupied a unique position in Frankfurt's complex social hierarchy. The family's house on Henkersgasse reflected their unusual status in the community. Larger than most craftsmen's homes, built of stone rather than timber, it nevertheless lacked the ostentatious displays that marked the residences of truly wealthy merchants or minor nobility. Johann had learned from his father Klaus the importance of maintaining prosperity without flaunting it, success without arrogance. The house's solid construction and well-maintained appearance announced the family's competence and reliability, while its modest decoration avoided giving offense to neighbors already ambivalent about their proximity to the executioner's household. Inside, the house revealed the complexity of the Vollstrecker family's daily existence. The main hall served for receiving official visitors, judges, clerks, and other court officials who came to discuss upcoming executions or legal procedures. Here, Johann maintained his professional demeanor, discussing the technical aspects of his work with the same matter-of-fact tone other craftsmen used to describe their specialties. A separate sitting room provided space for the family's private life, carefully insulated from the professional concerns that dominated so much of their existence. The children's upbringing required constant navigation between their family's unusual circumstances and the normal expectations of medieval childhood. Wilhelm, now 17 and deeply involved in learning the family trade, carried himself with the serious bearing appropriate to his inheritance. His younger sister Greta faced different challenges, her marriage prospects complicated by her father's profession, yet her education proceeding along lines suitable for a prosperous craftsman's daughter. The youngest, Klaus, showed early signs of preferring scholarly pursuits to the family calling, a choice that would require careful planning and considerable expense. Johann's daily routine began before dawn with prayers in the family's private chapel, a small room containing a crucifix, several religious texts, and a list of names representing everyone he had executed over the years. This morning devotion served multiple purposes: maintaining his spiritual health, honoring the memory of the condemned, and preparing mentally for whatever the day might bring. The prayer routine had been passed down from his grandfather Wilhelm and represented one of the family's most important traditions. The workshop occupied a separate building behind the main house, its heavy wooden door secured with iron locks and bars. Here, Johann spent hours each week maintaining the tools of his trade, but also pursuing the healing practice that supplemented the family's income. His knowledge of human anatomy, derived from his professional experience, made him surprisingly effective at treating injuries and illnesses that conventional physicians struggle to address. Word of his medical skill traveled through informal networks, bringing patients who might otherwise avoid any contact with the executioner's household. The healing practice required its own specialized knowledge and equipment. Duhan maintained an extensive collection of herbs and medicinal preparations, their properties learned through years of study and experimentation. His understanding of bone structure allowed him to set fractures with unusual precision, while his knowledge of blood flow proved valuable in treating various wounds and injuries. Patients arrived discreetly, often after dark, seeking treatment they couldn't obtain elsewhere. Anna's role in the family enterprise extended far beyond traditional domestic duties. She managed much of the business correspondence, maintaining relationships with officials in distant towns who might require Johan's services. Her careful record-keeping tracked not only family finances, but also the complex web of obligations and favors that characterized professional relationships in medieval society. She negotiated contracts, arranged travel logistics, and handled many of the administrative details that allowed Johan to focus on the technical aspects of his work. The family's diet reflected their prosperity while acknowledging their social isolation. Anna could afford quality ingredients, fresh meat, imported spices, and fine wines for special occasions, but she purchased them from vendors who maintained strictly professional relationships with the family. Meals were often taken privately, as social dining with other families remained complicated by their professional identity. The children learned early to appreciate good food while understanding that their family's social life would always carry certain constraints. Education occupied a central place in the Volstricker household, with Johan and Anna ensuring that all their children received instruction appropriate to their stations. Wilhelm's education focused on the skills required for his eventual inheritance: literacy, numeracy, basic medicine, and the complex legal knowledge necessary for understanding various types of criminal cases. Greta learned domestic management, herb law, and the social graces that might help her overcome her family's professional stigma in securing a good marriage. Young Klaus studied Latin and basic theology, preparing for a possible career in the church that would provide respectable employment outside the family trade. The family's relationship with the local clergy remained complex and carefully maintained. Father Benedict, who ministered to condemned prisoners, had developed a professional respect for Johan's competence and compassion, but their relationship remained formal rather than friendly. The family attended Mass regularly, contributed to church charities, and sought to demonstrate their piety through actions rather than words. Yet they understood that clerical approval, while valuable, didn't necessarily translate into broader social acceptance. Financial management required careful attention to both immediate needs and long-term security. Executioners earned substantial fees for their services. Johan might receive the equivalent of a skilled craftsman's annual wages for a single execution, but the work was irregular and unpredictable. Long periods might pass between commissions, requiring the family to maintain reserves while avoiding the appearance of excessive wealth. Anna developed sophisticated strategies for investing surplus income in property and trade goods that would provide steady returns during quiet periods. The family's leisure activities reflected their social position's constraints and opportunities. Johan maintained an extensive library by medieval standards, including works on medicine, law, and natural philosophy that supported both his professional development and intellectual interests. Anna cultivated an herb garden that served both practical and aesthetic purposes, while providing ingredients for her medicinal preparations. The children learned music and dancing, accomplishments that might help them integrate into broader society despite their family background. Evening meals brought the family together for their most important daily ritual. Conversation ranged across current events, family concerns, and professional matters. with Johann and Anna working to maintain normalcy while acknowledging their unusual circumstances. These discussions served to strengthen family bonds while preparing the children for the realities they would face as adults. The meals concluded with prayers for the dead, both those Johann had executed and others who had touched their lives, reinforcing the family's commitment to maintaining their humanity despite their difficult calling. The morning light filtering through the stained glass windows of St. Sebald's Church in Nuremberg cast coloured shadows across the faces of two young people whose wedding would unite not merely their hearts, but two of Germany's most established executioner dynasties. Wilhelm Vollstrecker of Frankfurt stood beside Marguerite Schmidt, daughter of the renowned master Franz Schmidt, as Father Hermann prepared to bless a union that had been years in the planning and would shape the future of their ancient profession. The courtship had begun 3 years earlier, through the careful correspondence between Anna Vollstrecker and Ursula Schmidt, wives who understood better than most the complexities of arranging suitable marriages for their children. In their lengthy letters, written in careful Gothic script and carried by trusted messengers across the German states, these mothers had negotiated not just a romantic match, but a strategic alliance between families whose reputations and fortunes were inextricably linked to their professional competence. Marguerite had been raised with a particular knowledge that her marriage options would be limited by her father's profession. Beautiful, intelligent, and well-educated according to the standards appropriate for a prosperous craftsman's daughter, she nevertheless understood that most families would hesitate to welcome the executioner's child into their lineage. Her parents had prepared her for this reality while ensuring she developed the skills and character that would make her an asset to whichever executioner family might welcome her. The Schmidt family's reputation enhanced Marguerite's prospects considerably. Master Franz Schmidt had served Nuremberg with distinction for over 4 decades, executing nearly 600 criminals with such skill and mercy that his name had become synonymous with professional competence throughout the Holy Roman Empire. His meticulous diary, maintained in careful detail for decades, demonstrated not only technical proficiency, but also genuine concern for the spiritual welfare of those he executed. This reputation reflected favorably on all members of his household. Wilhelm's attraction to Marguerite had developed gradually through their carefully chaperoned meetings. Her intelligence impressed him. She could discuss not only domestic management, but also the legal and medical knowledge that formed part of any executioner family's inheritance. More importantly, she demonstrated the emotional strength necessary for a life forever shadowed by her husband's profession. During their conversations, she showed neither morbid curiosity about the family trade nor squeamish revulsion, but rather the matter-of-fact acceptance that characterized those born into the executioner's world. The marriage negotiations had required months of delicate discussion. Both families needed to consider not only the immediate compatibility of the young couple, but also the long-term strategic implications of their union. The Vollstrecker family brought to the alliance their established position in Frankfurt, their growing reputation throughout the German states, and their valuable connections with court officials and legal authorities. The Schmidt family offered their unparalleled professional reputation, their extensive network of contacts throughout the Holy Roman Empire, and their accumulated wealth from decades of successful practice. Financial arrangements occupied considerable attention during the negotiations. Marguerite's dowry included not only the traditional household goods and cash payments, but also several of her father's professional texts, medical treatises, and legal commentaries that had guided the Schmidt family's practice for generations. Wilhelm's family reciprocated with promises of property in Frankfurt and guarantees of Marguerite's security should their marriage face unexpected difficulties. These practical considerations reflected the executioner community's understanding that professional reputation and financial stability were inseparable. The wedding ceremony itself required careful navigation of social sensitivities. While both families could afford elaborate celebrations, They chose instead to emphasize dignity and solemnity over ostentation. The guest list included representatives from other executioner families across Germany, court officials from both Frankfurt and Nuremberg, and select members of the medical and legal communities who had developed professional relationships with the two families. Notably absent were the merchants and craftsmen who formed the social backbone of both cities. Their absence a quiet reminder of the executioner family's perpetual social isolation. Father Hermann's blessing carried particular significance, as he had served as spiritual advisor to condemned prisoners in Nuremberg for over 20 years. His willingness to officiate at the wedding represented a form of ecclesiastical approval that both families valued highly. His sermon emphasized themes of justice tempered by mercy, service to community despite personal cost, and the sacred nature of marriage as a partnership in bearing life's most difficult burdens. The homily served as both blessing and reminder of the unique challenges this union would face. The wedding feast, held in the Schmidt family's substantial home, showcased the prosperity that professional competence had brought to both families. The tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fine wines, and delicacies imported from distant regions. Yet the conversation remained subdued, reflecting the guests' understanding that this celebration marked not just a joyous union, but also the continuation of a tradition that society needed, but preferred not to acknowledge too openly. Traditional wedding gifts took on special meaning in the context of executioner marriages. Among the household goods and decorative items common to any prosperous wedding, Marguerite received from her father a set of medical instruments crafted by Nuremberg's finest smiths, while Wilhelm's family presented her with rare herbs and medicinal texts that would support her expected role in the family's healing practice. These professional gifts acknowledged that executioner wives were partners in the family enterprise rather than merely domestic managers. The marriage's immediate aftermath required careful establishment of new routines and relationships. Marguerite's integration into Frankfurt society proceeded slowly and carefully, with Anna Volstrucker serving as guide and mentor in navigating the complex social landscape. The younger woman's education had prepared her well for these challenges, but practical experience in managing the delicate relationships that surrounded executioner families required time and patience to develop. Wilhelm and Marguerite's partnership extended far beyond domestic arrangements to encompass full collaboration in the family's professional activities. She quickly demonstrated competence in maintaining medical supplies, managing business correspondence, and even assisting with the psychological preparation that preceded each execution. Her education in the Schmidt household had included training in these areas, but adapting to the Volstrucker family's specific practices required months of careful learning. The couple's first year of marriage coincided with a particularly active period in Frankfurt's criminal justice system, providing Marguerite with intensive exposure to her new family's work. She observed Wilhelm's increasing confidence as he assumed greater responsibility in assisting his father, while she developed her own expertise in the medical and administrative aspects of the family enterprise. These shared experiences strengthened their marriage while preparing them for eventual full inheritance of family responsibilities. Children represented both blessing and challenge for executioner families. Wilhelm and Marguerite's first child, born 18 months after their marriage, would grow up knowing that his or her future options would be shaped by the family profession. The parents began planning immediately for their child's education and eventual career, understanding that careful preparation could help overcome the social obstacles their offspring would inevitably face. The extended family network created by executioner marriages provided crucial support during difficult periods. When political upheavals in Frankfurt temporarily reduced demand for executions, the family could rely on connections established through marriage to find work in other jurisdictions. Similarly, when illness or injury temporarily incapacitated family members, relatives from distant cities could provide assistance and expertise. These networks represented one of the executioner community's most valuable assets. Property inheritance required careful planning to ensure both family security and professional continuity. The Volstricker family's holdings in Frankfurt needed to be preserved for future generations, while also providing for children who might choose alternative careers. Marriage contracts typically included detailed provisions for property distribution, inheritance rights, and support obligations that would protect family members regardless of changing circumstances. The complex intermarriage patterns within the executioner community created kinship networks that spanned much of Europe. A map of these relationships would reveal connections linking families from Scotland to Sicily, from Portugal to Poland. These networks facilitated professional communication, provided mutual support during crises, and helped maintain the high standards that characterized the most successful executioner dynasties. Marriage also served to preserve and transmit the specialized knowledge that each family had accumulated over generations. Medical techniques, execution methods, and business practices were shared between families through marriage alliances, creating a collective repository of professional expertise. This knowledge sharing helped maintain consistent standards across the executioner community while fostering innovation and improvement in professional practices. The leather-bound ledger on Johann Volstricker's desk told a story that few outside his profession would have recognized: the careful accounting of a business built upon society's ultimate sanction. Each entry, recorded in Johann's precise script, represented not merely a financial transaction, but a human life ended in service to medieval justice. The morning sun slanted through his study window as he prepared his quarterly accounts for the Frankfurt City Council, a ritual that had become as routine as sharpening his sword, yet no less significant for its familiarity. The economics of execution in medieval Europe followed patterns that reflected both the practical necessities of professional service and the complex social attitudes surrounding capital punishment. Executioners commanded substantial fees for their work. Johann's standard rate for a beheading had reached 12 silver marks, equivalent to what a master craftsman might earn in 3 months of regular labor. Yet, this apparent prosperity came with unique challenges and constraints that made financial management a crucial skill for any successful executioner family. Payment structures varied considerably across different jurisdictions and types of executions. Simple beheadings commanded the highest fees, reflecting both the skill required and the merciful nature of this method. Hangings typically paid less, though the executioner might receive additional compensation for providing the rope and constructing the gallows. More complex punishments, drawing and quartering, burning at the stake, or elaborate public tortures brought premium rates that acknowledged the additional time, equipment, and expertise they required. Johann's ledger revealed the irregular nature of his income. 3 months might pass without a single execution, followed by a period when political upheavals or crime waves brought multiple commissions within weeks. This unpredictability required careful financial planning, with successful executioner families learning to manage resources during lean periods while avoiding ostentatious displays during prosperous times. Anna Volstricker's household management skills proved as crucial to the family's success as Johann's professional competence. The fee structure typically included several components beyond the basic execution payment. Travel expenses were covered when executioners worked outside their home jurisdictions, often including not only transportation costs, but also food, lodging, and compensation for time away from other business activities. Equipment maintenance represented another billable expense, particularly for complex executions that might damage or wear out specialized tools. Johann maintained detailed records of these ancillary costs, ensuring that his professional reputation for fairness extended to financial matters. Regional variations in payment rates reflected local economic conditions and legal traditions. Wealthy commercial cities like Frankfurt or Nuremberg could afford to pay premium rates for experienced executioners, while smaller towns might offer reduced fees or payment in kind rather than coin. Johann maintained correspondence with colleagues throughout the Holy Roman Empire, sharing information about rates and working conditions that helped all executioners negotiate fair compensation for their services. The executioners' monopoly on legal executions within their jurisdiction provided significant economic advantages while imposing corresponding responsibilities. Johann's exclusive contract with Frankfurt guaranteed him all official executions within the city and surrounding territories, but also obligated him to respond promptly to official summons regardless of personal convenience. This arrangement provided income security while limiting his freedom to pursue more lucrative opportunities elsewhere. Supplementary income sources proved essential for most executioner families' long-term prosperity. Johann's medical practice generated steady revenue throughout the year, providing financial stability during periods when executions were rare. His expertise in treating injuries and illnesses that conventional physicians found challenging created a loyal patient base willing to pay premium rates for effective care. And as herb garden and medicinal preparations contributed additional income while enhancing the family's reputation for healing knowledge. Investment strategies for executioner families required careful consideration of their unique social position. Direct involvement in commerce or manufacturing faced obstacles from guild restrictions and social prejudices, but real estate investment offered opportunities for wealth accumulation that didn't depend on public acceptance. Johann owned several properties in Frankfurt beyond the family residence, generating rental income that provided long-term financial security. The costs of maintaining professional standards represented a significant ongoing expense. High-quality swords and axes required substantial initial investments, while their maintenance demanded premium materials and expert craftsmanship. Johann's primary sword, forged in Toledo at a cost equivalent to 2 years' worth of typical executions, would serve the family for generations if properly maintained. Yet even routine maintenance required expensive whetstones, oils, and occasional repairs by master smiths. Professional development expenses reflected the executioner community's commitment to maintaining high standards. Johann regularly invested in medical texts, legal commentaries, and technical manuals that enhanced his professional knowledge. Travel to conferences or meetings with other executioners provided opportunities for learning new techniques or discussing innovations, but required significant expenditures for transportation and accommodations. These investments in professional growth paid long-term dividends through enhanced reputation and increased fees. The family's standard of living needed careful calibration to avoid either the appearance of excessive wealth or the reality of inadequate resources. Their house, clothing, and household goods reflected prosperity appropriate to successful craftsmen, but avoided the ostentation that might provoke resentment or unwanted attention. Johann and Anna understood that their family's social position required them to demonstrate success without flaunting it, competence without arrogance. Employee costs represented another consideration for busy executioner families. Johann occasionally hired assistants for major executions or complex scaffold construction, requiring additional outlays for wages and equipment. Training apprentices from outside the family demanded both financial investment and careful attention to maintaining professional standards. These employment relationships required delicate management to ensure both professional competence and appropriate social behavior. Tax obligations varied according to local customs and political arrangements. Some jurisdictions exempted executioners from certain taxes in recognition of their essential public service, while others imposed additional levies as a form of moral disapproval. Johann maintained careful records of all tax payments and exemptions, ensuring compliance with local regulations while protecting the family's financial interests through legitimate means. Emergency reserves occupied a crucial place in execution of family financial planning. Political upheavals could suddenly eliminate income sources, while social unrest might force families to relocate with little notice. Duhan maintained liquid assets sufficient to support the family for extended periods without income, providing security against the various risks that threatened their livelihood. These reserves required careful management to prevent inflation from eroding their value while ensuring immediate accessibility when needed. Retirement planning presented particular challenges for executioner families. The physical and emotional demands of the profession typically limited active careers to 30 or 40 years, requiring families to accumulate sufficient wealth to support themselves after professional retirement. Duhan studied the experiences of other executioner families, learning from their successes and failures in managing the transition from active practice to retirement. These lessons influenced his investment strategies and savings goals throughout his active career. The economics of executioner dynasties extended beyond individual families to encompass the broader professional community. Informal networks shared information about fee rates, working conditions, and investment opportunities, creating a form of professional solidarity that benefited all practitioners. These relationships proved particularly valuable during negotiations with authorities who might attempt to exploit individual executioners' isolated positions to reduce compensation or impose unreasonable conditions. The peely dawn hours found Johann Volstricker kneeling in his private chapel, a small room where morning light would soon illuminate the wooden crucifix that had watched over 3 generations of his family. Before him lay an open prayer book, its pages worn soft by decades of use, containing devotions that his grandfather Wilhelm had commissioned specifically for those who administered society's ultimate punishment. In a few hours, Johann would walk to Frankfurt's main square to execute a young woman convicted of infanticide, and these quiet moments of prayer formed the spiritual foundation that allowed him to serve justice while preserving his soul. The moral framework within which executioner families operated drew upon complex theological, legal, and ethical traditions that had evolved over centuries of Christian thought about justice, mercy, and the state's right to take life. Medieval theology provided clear justification for capital punishment, grounding it in biblical authority and natural law theory. Yet this intellectual foundation did little to ease the emotional burden carried by those who transformed legal theory into physical reality. The executioner stood at the intersection of divine command and human action, serving as the instrument through which society's judgment became a irrevocable fact. St. Augustine's teachings on just war and legitimate authority provided the theological bedrock for medieval executioners' understanding of their role. The state, as God's appointed agent for maintaining order, possessed the authority to punish wrongdoing even unto death. The executioner served not as a murderer, but as justice's instrument, his actions sanctified by proper authority and righteous purpose. Yet Augustine's writings also emphasized the importance of mercy and the possibility of redemption, creating a tension that conscientious executioners felt deeply throughout their careers. Thomas Aquinas had further developed these themes, arguing that capital punishment served not only retributive justice, but also the protection of society and the potential reformation of other potential criminals. His synthesis of Aristotelian philosophy with Christian doctrine provided intellectual respectability for the executioner's profession, while acknowledging its moral complexity. Johann had studied these theological arguments, finding in them both justification for his work and recognition of its spiritual weight. The practical application of these theological principles required executioner families to develop sophisticated approaches to moral reasoning. Johann's father Klaus had taught him that each execution demanded careful consideration of the condemned person's circumstances, their expressions of remorse or defiance, and the nature of their crimes. While legal authority provided the framework for action, Moral judgment influenced how that authority was exercised, the speed and efficiency with which the sentence was carried out, the dignity afforded to the condemned in their final moments, and the spiritual counsel offered during preparation for death. Prayer formed a cornerstone of the Volstricker family's approach to their moral challenges. Each execution was preceded by specific devotions asking for divine guidance in performing their duties mercifully and justly. Johann maintained a prayer list that included the names of everyone he had executed, and he regularly offered masses for their souls at Frankfurt's cathedral. These practices served not as mere ritual, but as genuine attempts to maintain spiritual connection with those whose lives he had ended in service to law. The family's relationship with the church required careful navigation of competing theological perspectives. While official doctrine supported capital punishment and the executioner's role in administering it, individual clergy members often struggled with the practical reality of taking human life. Father Benedict, who ministered to condemned prisoners, had developed deep respect for Johann's competence and compassion, but their professional relationship remained formally cordial rather than personally intimate. The executioner's spiritual needs required understanding from clergy who had never faced the moral complexities of ending human life. Johann's approach to condemned prisoners reflected his family's commitment to balancing justice with mercy. He spent time with each prisoner before execution, not merely to explain the practical aspects of what would happen, but to offer what spiritual comfort his position allowed. His medical knowledge often proved valuable in identifying signs of mental illness or extreme distress that might warrant official reconsideration of the sentence. While he never advocated for clemency, such intervention would exceed his proper authority. He ensured that relevant information reached appropriate officials. The children's moral education presented particular challenges for executioner families. Wilhelm's training included not only technical instruction, but also careful development of the ethical framework necessary for understanding their family's work. Johann and Anna emphasized themes of service, duty, and compassion while acknowledging the gravity of their professional responsibilities. They taught their children to see their father not as a taker of life, but as a servant of justice who bore society's burden of enforcing its ultimate sanction. Different types of crimes evoked varying emotional responses from the executioner and his family. Executing murderers who had shown no remorse presented fewer moral difficulties than ending the life of someone whose crime had been driven by desperation or mental illness. Johann found particular challenge in cases involving young people whose poor judgment had led to capital crimes, or mothers who had killed infants born from rape or desperate poverty. These cases required him to maintain professional detachment while acknowledging the tragic circumstances that had led to his involvement. The question of mercy within justice occupied constant consideration in Johann's work. Medieval law provided specific procedures for requesting clemency, and the executioner played a role in ensuring these procedures were properly followed. Johann carefully observed condemned prisoners for signs of genuine repentance, mental incapacity, or other factors that might warrant official reconsideration. His reports to court officials emphasized factual observations rather than personal opinions, but his reputation for fairness and competence gave weight to his assessments. Community attitudes toward executioner families reflected broader social ambivalence about capital punishment itself. While medieval society accepted the necessity of execution for certain crimes, many people preferred not to confront the reality too directly. This created a complex dynamic where executioners were simultaneously essential and marginalized, respected for their skill, yet kept at social distance. Johann and his family learned to navigate these attitudes with patience and understanding, recognizing that their neighbors' discomfort reflected moral sensitivity rather than personal hostility. The psychological toll of the profession required active management throughout an executioner's career. Johann had developed personal rituals for processing the emotional impact of his work evening prayers, conversations with Anna about his concerns, and periodic retreats for extended spiritual reflection. He studied the experiences of other executioner families, learning from their approaches to maintaining mental and spiritual health, despite their profession's unique demands. These practices proved essential for preventing the callousness or despair that could destroy both professional effectiveness and personal integrity. Retirement from active practice brought its own moral considerations. Johann observed older executioners struggling with memories of their professional activities, some finding peace through increased religious devotion, while others battled persistent guilt or regret. He planned his own eventual retirement carefully, establishing practices and relationships that would support continued spiritual growth after his professional responsibilities ended. The transition from active executioner to retired craftsman required as much careful preparation as any other aspect of the profession. The executioner's moral world also encompassed responsibilities to future generations. Johann's work would influence how Wilhelm understood justice, mercy, and service to community. The family's reputation would affect their children's opportunities and social relationships for years to come. These considerations added another layer to the moral framework within which executioner families operated, encouraging them to maintain the highest possible standards, not only for their own sake, but for their descendants' benefit. The intersection of personal faith with professional duty created ongoing opportunities for spiritual growth and moral reflection. Johann found that his work deepened rather than diminished his appreciation for life's value and the complexity of human nature. Each execution reminded him of mortality's reality while reinforcing his commitment to serving justice with all possible mercy. His profession's moral challenges had strengthened rather than weakened his faith, though the path of that strengthening had required constant vigilance and spiritual discipline. The autumn mist that shrouded Frankfurt streets in 1523 seemed to carry whispers of change that would transform not only the Vollstrecker family's ancient profession, but the very foundations of European society. Wilhelm, now master executioner following his father Johann's peaceful death the previous spring, stood in his workshop examining a letter that would alter everything his family had built over 5 generations. The missive bore the seal of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, announcing new imperial decrees concerning criminal justice that would ripple through every courthouse and execution ground from the Baltic to the Mediterranean. The Renaissance had brought more than artistic flowering and intellectual revival to Europe. It had introduced new approaches to law, governance, and social organization that challenged many medieval traditions. Legal scholars trained in universities rather than practical experience began questioning execution methods that had served for centuries, while humanist philosophers raised uncomfortable questions about the state's right to take life. These intellectual currents, combined with religious upheaval and political transformation, created pressures that would fundamentally reshape the executioner's role in society. Wilhelm's correspondence with other executioner families across the empire revealed a profession in transition. Master Heinrich Schmidt in Nuremberg reported declining execution rates as courts increasingly favored imprisonment or exile over death sentences. The executioner of Cologne wrote of new legal procedures that required extensive documentation and multiple appeals, transforming what had once been swift justice into prolonged legal processes. Even more troubling, several cities had begun experimenting with alternative approaches to criminal punishment that eliminated the need for professional executioners altogether. The Protestant Reformation had introduced additional complications to the executioner's moral and social position. While Catholic theology had provided clear justification for capital punishment grounded in natural law and divine authority, Protestant reformers offered varying interpretations of biblical teaching on justice and mercy. Some Protestant regions had abolished certain types of executions entirely, while others had introduced new forms of punishment that required different skills and equipment. Wilhelm found himself navigating not only professional change but theological uncertainty that affected his family's spiritual foundation. Economic pressures accompanied these social and religious transformations. The irregular income that had always characterized executioner families became even less predictable as execution rates declined and legal procedures became more complex. Wilhelm's account books revealed months passing without a single commission, forcing him to rely increasingly on his medical practice and other supplementary activities. The financial model that had supported executioner dynasties for generations faced unprecedented challenges that required new strategies for survival. The rise of printed books and increased literacy had begun to demystify the executioner's specialized knowledge. Medical texts once available only to a few professional families were now widely distributed, while legal commentaries explained criminal procedures in detail that eliminated much of the executioner's advisory role. Wilhelm's grandfather Johann had served as an expert consultant on matters of criminal justice, but courts increasingly relied on university-trained lawyers rather than practitioners with traditional knowledge. This shift diminished both the executioner's income and social status within the legal system. Technological innovations presented both opportunities and threats to the profession's future. Improved metallurgy had produced better weapons and tools, allowing executioners to perform their work with greater efficiency and mercy than ever before. Yet the same technological advances that benefited the profession also made it more accessible to occasional practitioners, reducing the value of hereditary expertise. Wilhelm worried that his family's accumulated knowledge and carefully maintained reputation might become less relevant in a world where technical skill could be more easily acquired. The family's response to these changes required careful planning and considerable adaptation. Wilhelm began expanding the medical practice that had supplemented his father's income, investing in new equipment, and establishing relationships with physicians who appreciated his anatomical knowledge. He sent his youngest brother Klaus to university to study law, hoping that formal education might open opportunities within the changing legal system. His sister Greta married into a merchant family, establishing connections outside the executioner community that might prove valuable as traditional support networks weakened. Public attitudes toward executions were evolving in ways that created new challenges for professional practitioners. While medieval crowds had viewed executions as community events that reinforced social order, Renaissance audiences increasingly approached them with a mixture of morbid curiosity and intellectual analysis that changed the entire social dynamic. Wilhelm noticed that spectators now commented on his technique, compared different execution methods, and sometimes questioned the justice of particular sentences in ways that would have been unthinkable a generation earlier. The growth of centralized state power was gradually eliminating the patchwork of local jurisdictions that had provided employment opportunities for itinerant executioners. Large territorial states preferred to maintain their own permanent staff rather than hiring specialists from outside their borders, reducing the geographic mobility that had allowed executioner families to build regional reputations. Wilhelm found his services less frequently requested by distant courts, forcing him to focus more intensively on opportunities within Frankfurt and its immediate surroundings. Professional standardization, while improving the quality of criminal justice, also threatened the unique expertise that had distinguished successful executioner families. Imperial decrees now specified exact procedures for different types of executions, reducing the discretionary authority that had allowed skilled practitioners to demonstrate their competence. Wilhelm's ability to adapt techniques to particular circumstances, once valued as professional expertise, was increasingly constrained by regulations that emphasized uniformity over individual skill. The emergence of alternative punishment methods presented the most fundamental challenge to the executioner's traditional role. Imprisonment was becoming more common as societies developed institutional capacity to house long-term prisoners. Exile and transportation to distant colonies offered alternatives to execution that satisfied justice while eliminating the need for capital punishment. Even when executions continued, they increasingly took forms such as public hanging by civil authorities that required less specialized skill than the traditional methods that had sustained executioner dynasties. Wilhelm's children faced choices that would have been unthinkable for previous generations. His eldest son Johann showed aptitude for the family trade, but questioned whether it offered a viable future. His daughter Marguerite possessed the intelligence and education that might allow her to marry outside the executioner community, but such marriages required careful negotiation of social and financial obstacles. The youngest children had opportunities for education and career development that their ancestors could never have imagined. Yet these opportunities came at the cost of abandoning centuries of family tradition. The decline of executioner dynasties proceeded at different rates across Europe, influenced by local conditions and cultural traditions. In some regions, political conservatism and religious orthodoxy maintained demand for traditional forms of criminal justice well into the 18th century. Other areas experienced rapid transformation that eliminated the profession within a generation. Wilhelm studied these regional variations, hoping to identify locations where his family's expertise might remain valuable despite broader trends toward change. Efforts to preserve professional knowledge and traditions took on new urgency as the number of active executioner families declined. Wilhelm began corresponding with scholars interested in documenting traditional legal practices, contributing to collections of legal customs and procedures that might otherwise have been lost. He encouraged his children to maintain family records and traditions even if they chose different careers, recognizing that their heritage represented valuable historical knowledge regardless of its practical relevance. The transformation of the executioner's role from essential craftsman to historical curiosity occurred gradually but inexorably throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. Families that had served their communities for generations found themselves displaced by changing social attitudes, legal reforms, and administrative restructuring. Some adapted successfully to new circumstances, while others disappeared entirely as their children chose different paths and their accumulated expertise became irrelevant to contemporary needs. Wilhelm's own career spanned this crucial transition period, allowing him to witness both the final flowering of traditional executioner culture and the beginning of its ultimate decline. His response to these changes, combining adaptation with preservation, innovation with respect for tradition, exemplified the careful balance required for navigating fundamental social transformation while maintaining family integrity and professional dignity. The candlelight flickered across the final pages of Wilhelm Volstrucker's memoir as he completed the last entry on a cold December evening in 1547. Outside his study window, snow fell silently on Frankfurt's cobblestone streets, blanketing the city in the same peaceful quiet that had settled over his family's ancient profession. After performing his final execution 6 months earlier, a mercy killing, really, for an aged thief who had welcomed death as release from a life of suffering, Wilhelm had officially retired from active practice, ending a family tradition that had spanned nearly 2 centuries. The memoir, written in careful Gothic script across hundreds of pages, represented Wilhelm's attempt to preserve not merely the technical knowledge that had sustained 5 generations of Volstruckers, but the human story of a family that had served society's harshest needs while maintaining their essential humanity. Each chapter detailed not only methods and procedures, but also the moral frameworks, social relationships, and personal struggles that had defined the executioner's experience throughout the medieval period. Future historians, Wilhelm hoped, might find in these pages a more complete understanding of medieval justice than could be gleaned from official records alone. His final execution had embodied many of the themes that characterized his family's approach to their profession. The condemned man, Friedrich Weiss, had killed a merchant during a robbery but had spent his final weeks in genuine repentance, working with Father Benedict to prepare his soul for judgment. Wilhelm had ensured that the execution proceeded with all possible dignity and mercy, while Friedrich's family received the compassionate treatment that had become a hallmark of the Vollstrecker professional style. The event attracted little public attention, a marked contrast to the crowds that had gathered for executions in his grandfather's time, reflecting society's changing attitudes toward both crime and punishment. The workshop that had been the heart of the family enterprise for generations now served primarily as a museum of their professional heritage. Wilhelm's sons had chosen different paths. Johann had become a successful physician, combining the family's medical knowledge with university training, while Klaus had established himself as a legal advisor to Frankfurt's growing commercial community. Only young Wilhelm showed any interest in preserving the family's traditional knowledge, though his fascination seemed more scholarly than practical, reflecting the broader transformation of executioner expertise from living craft to historical curiosity. The extended network of executioner families that had once spanned Europe was dissolving as political centralization and legal reform eliminated most traditional positions. Wilhelm's correspondence with former colleagues revealed a profession in its final stages. Some families had successfully transitioned to alternative careers. Others had simply disappeared as their children integrated into broader society, and a few maintained ceremonial positions that preserved their titles but involved little actual work. The community that had sustained his family for generations was fragmenting beyond recovery. Yet the dissolution of executioner dynasties didn't represent simple failure or obsolescence. Wilhelm recognized that his family's contribution to medieval society had been genuine and valuable, helping to maintain order and justice during centuries when alternative approaches to criminal punishment remained underdeveloped. The skills they had cultivated, the standards they had maintained, and the humanitarian principles they had championed had served their communities well during an era when such service was desperately needed. The moral legacy of executioner families proved more enduring than their practical functions. The ethical frameworks they had developed for reconciling justice with mercy, duty with compassion, continued to influence discussions of criminal punishment long after traditional executions had disappeared. Wilhelm's writings on the psychological and spiritual challenges of administering capital punishment would eventually contribute to broader philosophical discussions about the state's right to take life and the moral obligations that accompanied such authority. The medical knowledge accumulated by executioner families found new applications as their descendants entered legitimate healing professions. Johann's combination of traditional anatomical expertise with contemporary medical training made him exceptionally effective as a physician, while his inherited understanding of human psychology proved valuable in treating patients whose conditions reflected social and emotional as well as physical ailments. The healing traditions that had developed as supplements to the executioner's primary profession evolved into independent medical practices that served their communities for generations. Family properties and financial assets required careful management during the transition away from traditional professional activities. Wilhelm had invested wisely in real estate and commercial ventures that would provide security for his descendants regardless of their career choices. The substantial wealth accumulated through centuries of professional service allowed the family to support their children's education and career development without the financial pressures that might have forced them to continue unwanted family traditions. The preservation of family records and artifacts became Wilhelm's final professional responsibility. He donated his father's execution sword to Frankfurt's cathedral, where it would serve as a memorial to the role of justice in medieval society. The detailed diaries and account books that had tracked the family's activities for generations were carefully organized and stored, providing valuable historical documentation for future scholars interested in medieval criminal justice. Even the family's collection of medical texts and legal commentaries found homes in institutional libraries, where they would remain accessible for research and study. Wilhelm's children faced the complex task of integrating their unusual heritage into more conventional social identities. While they appreciated their family's historical significance and professional competence, they also needed to establish themselves within communities that had no place for traditional executioner expertise. Their success in making this transition reflected both their individual talents and the careful preparation their parents had provided for a future that would require different skills and approaches. The broader social transformation that had eliminated demand for professional executioners continued reshaping European approaches to criminal justice throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. The development of professional police forces, standardized legal procedures, and institutional alternatives to capital punishment created more systematic and arguably more humane approaches to maintaining social order. Yet these innovations also eliminated the personal relationships and individual accountability that had characterized traditional systems administered by hereditary specialists. Wilhelm's retirement years provided opportunities for reflection on the historical significance of his family's profession and its contributions to medieval society. He recognized that executioner dynasties had served essential functions during their era, maintaining professional standards, providing reliable service, and humanizing the administration of ultimate justice. Their disappearance marked not the failure of their approach, but the success of social evolution that had created alternative methods for achieving the same fundamental goals. The final entries in Wilhelm's memoir expressed neither regret nor pride, but rather a quiet satisfaction in having served his community competently and compassionately throughout his professional career. He had inherited ancient traditions and responsibilities from his ancestors, had fulfilled them to the best of his ability, and had prepared his children for futures that would require different forms of service to society. The cycle of inheritance and adaptation that had sustained his family for generations would continue, though in forms that previous generations could never have anticipated. As Wilhelm closed his memoir and extinguished the candle that had illuminated his final writing session, he understood that he was ending not only his own story, but also a chapter in European history that would never be repeated. The executioner dynasties that had served medieval justice were passing into memory, their practical functions absorbed by institutional alternatives, their human stories preserved primarily in documents like the one he had just completed. Yet their legacy would endure in the principles they had championed, the standards they had maintained, and the demonstration they had provided that even society's harshest necessities could be administered with competence, dignity, and mercy. The snow continued to fall outside Wilhelm's window as he prepared for bed, covering Frankfurt streets with the same gentle whiteness that would soon cover the graves of generations of Wahlstrickers who had served their community through centuries of change and challenge. Their story was ending, but their example of professional service and personal integrity would outlive the specific circumstances that had created their unusual calling. As we reach the end of our gentle journey through the lives and times of medieval executioner dynasties, the morning light filters through the same streets that once knew the measured footsteps of Master Wilhelm and his ancestors. The cobblestones that witnessed their daily routines now carry different stories. Yet the human themes that define their existence, duty and conscience, tradition and change, service and sacrifice remain as relevant today as they were 5 centuries ago. The story of the Wahlstricker family and their fellow executioner dynasties across medieval Europe offers us a unique window into the complexities of human society and the individuals who served its most difficult needs. These were not the mysterious, hooded figures of popular imagination, but real people who rose each morning to face challenges that would test anyone's moral courage and professional competence. They loved their children, worried about their futures, and sought to maintain their humanity while performing society's harshest duties. Their legacy extends far beyond the specific techniques of medieval capital punishment. In their careful attention to mercy with injustice, their development of professional standards that emphasize competence and compassion, and their creation of family traditions that preserved human dignity even in the darkest circumstances, they demonstrated principles that continue to influence how civilized societies approach the administration of justice. The gradual disappearance of executioner dynasties reflected not their failure, but society's evolution toward alternative approaches to criminal punishment. The institutional systems that replaced hereditary specialists offered their own advantages: greater consistency, reduced personal burden on individuals, and elimination of the social complications that had always surrounded executioner families. Yet something valuable was also lost in this transition: the personal accountability, individual expertise, and human relationships that had characterized traditional systems. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps you can imagine those quiet workshops where swords were sharpened not in anger, but in service, where families gathered each evening to share meals and maintain their connections to ordinary human life despite extraordinary professional demands. Picture the careful apprenticeships that transmitted not only technical skills, but moral frameworks for bearing society's heaviest burdens. Remember the marriages that united not only individuals, but traditions of service that spanned generations and crossed national boundaries. The executioner dynasties remind us that every society faces the challenge of maintaining order while preserving justice, of exercising necessary authority while protecting human dignity. Their story suggests that these challenges are best met not through impersonal institutions alone, but through individuals who accept difficult responsibilities and discharge them with competence, compassion, and unwavering commitment to the highest possible standards. In the end, the medieval executioner dynasties represent a fascinating chapter in humanity's ongoing effort to balance justice with mercy, duty with conscience, tradition with progress. Their careful records and patient service have left us a legacy of thoughtful engagement with moral complexity that remains valuable long after their specific profession has disappeared into history. Sleep well, knowing that throughout history, even in society's darkest corners, there have always been individuals who chose to serve with dignity, to maintain their humanity under impossible circumstances, and to pass on to their children not only professional skills, but also the moral courage necessary for bearing life's heaviest responsibilities. Their stories remind us that honor can be found in the most unexpected places, and that every society depends upon individuals willing to serve the common good despite personal cost. The bells of St. Bartholomew's Cathedral toll the midnight hour as our story comes to its close, their bronze voices carrying across the same city that once knew 5 generations of the Volstricker family. In their measured cadence, we might hear echoes of all the unsung servants who have maintained civilization's foundations through centuries of change and challenge, their quiet dedication ensuring that justice, however imperfect, continues to serve human needs across the turning of countless seasons. Let their memory rest in peace, their service honored, their humanity remembered. Good night,